We start off by looking at the first of two big theories of how society should be structured and why governments exist. This first theory is classical republicanism, and it goes all the way back to the ancient world, the classical world of the Greeks and the Romans. I'm going to be dropping a lot of names and moving fast, so pause often, write down more than you see on the screen, and Google things that interest you. Not for ourselves alone are we born. Our country claims a share of our being. Cicero was revered by our founding fathers. He rose as high as you could rise in the Roman Republic as one of the two chief executives, and he fell as far as you can fall, being assassinated for his republican political beliefs when the Roman Republic started to slide into the Roman Empire under the dictatorship of Julius Caesar. This Ciceronian quote is what I would pick as the catchphrase for classical republicanism. This philosophy is all about the common good, what is best for society as a whole, for the tribe, for the city-state, for the country. And the cardinal rule is that no part, no individual, no group is more important or should have its needs met ahead of that of the whole. One of the sort of textbook sources for these ideas is Aristotle's book, The Politics. And Aristotle gives two really helpful analogies here. One of them is to a colony of bees. Bees live harmoniously in society. Every bee has a specific role to play, whether it's the queen bee, a worker bee, etc. The other one I really like is connecting it to body parts. Think about this. You can't talk about what a body part is for without connecting it to the body as a whole. I mean, try it. What are the feet for? The feet help the body stand up. What's the stomach? The stomach keeps the body fed. It doesn't make any sense to talk about a stomach on its own. What's a stomach without a body? It's meaningless. How does this help us understand the individual and society? A white blood cell keeps the body safe from infection. A soldier, if you're a soldier, keeps the city safe from invasion. Or, a farmer keeps the city fed. You see what we've done here? We've defined the individual in terms of the role they play in society. Your personhood derives from your place. A person with no role to play, or a soldier without a city, is almost in a subhuman condition, or at least is missing one of the big components that we think is necessary to realize our full humanity. This is what Aristotle really meant when he said, man is by nature a political animal, and we're defined by our connections with others. A more recent scholar put a nice phrasing of this. He said, to Aristotle, you release personal virtue through civic participation. Not all roles in society are equally valued. Some tasks are higher or more prestigious than others. The most honorable of all are politics and war, defending the interests of the city-state. You may notice this has gendered implications. War and politics were seen as two typically masculine occupations, and manliness and virtue were often linked. And what this means in practice in the ancient world is that citizenship is quite closely linked with military service. In ancient Sparta, young men of the ruling class are trained from birth to be warriors. Citizenship comes only after you've served in the Spartan army for 18 years. In ancient Athens, the official recognition that you're a citizen is that you have enough money to buy a hoplite's armor, the armor of an ancient Greek soldier, because then you can defend your country, and if you can defend your country, you have a stake in political decision-making. And a soldier, of all people, is supposed to put his country ahead of himself, so that's the most classically Republican you can get. So there's a great story in Rousseau of a Spartan mother whose sons are off at war, and a messenger comes home bearing terrible news. He says, I'm so sorry, your sons have been killed. And she becomes impatient with him, and she ends up bursting out. But get to the important part. Did we win or lose? And Rousseau adds, now that mother, she was a citizen. We've been hinting at this idea of civic virtue for a little while now, so let's officially define that because it is the fundamental idea of classical republicanism. We'll use Montesquieu's definition. All the founders read Montesquieu. He was a French thinker who wrote this big sprawling book, The Spirit of the Laws, about all the types of government in the world and what makes them tick. More on that to come. For Republican self-government, Montesquieu says you need a people who have civic virtue, which is a self-renunciation, self-denial, which is ever arduous and painful. This virtue may be defined by the love of the laws and of our country. Such love requires a constant preference of public to private interest. You have to prefer the public interest to your own, and there has to be an element of sacrifice. It has to hurt. For example, Cato the Younger was a very virtuous figure, another Roman who fought for the Roman Republic against Caesar's absolute rule. First he fought for that cause within the Senate, and then he fought to the death through a war, so war and politics, very manly. He was incorruptible. He refused to take bribes that would have made him a very wealthy man if he just kept quiet, and then he was fearless. He staked his life. So he wasn't concerned with enriching himself, and he wasn't concerned for his own life. He did it for the public. He put the republic first, showing virtue. And the founding fathers would have thought, if only more had been like him, the republic would never have fallen. Our founders really did worship the guy. Two of the most famous quotes from that period, "Give me liberty or give me death," and "I regret that I have but one life to give for my country." Those quotes aren't original. Those quotes come from a popular play at the time that was written about Cato the Younger. His character speaks them. So if virtue is so important, how do you promote it? Well, you start young. The classical Republican believes that virtue must be learned. And you do this by focusing on moral and character education. You study the lives of great men, Cato and others, to learn lessons from their conduct. In the public sphere, education continues through our rituals and our temples and our celebrations. And so if you celebrate virtue as a sort of civic religion, people will have icons and models to follow. This was certainly part of our founding fathers' education and a large part of the reason they would have learned Latin and sometimes Greek in schools. The opposite of civic virtue is corruption. Corruption has two meanings, and it's important to be clear which meaning you're using. In its narrow meaning, corruption is a crime in which a public official takes money in exchange for abusing their power or influence. For example, if I have a case before a judge and I bribe the judge to rule for me, that judge is corrupt. In its broad meaning, and this is how the word is used in classical Republican philosophy, corruption is when a part of society puts its interests above the interests of the whole. For example, if a king begins a war for a selfish motive, say to win personal power and glory, without considering the greater interests of his kingdom, that king is corrupt. If he ignores the suffering of his people, the king, who is only a part of society, governs as if he were the whole. For classical Republicans, an individual politician can be corrupt, but so can an entire government or a group of citizens. In an extremely sick society, where there's no civic virtue and only selfishness, the citizen body as a whole could be said to be corrupt.